So I would encourage anyone who is keen, any would-be entrepreneurs out there, to think about the way in which they cultivate those relationships and what they put in, how they assist others. Very, very small inputs and gestures today can often come back and be incredibly important down the line.
Do you know what today is? Well, it's a perfect day to be listening to the ALU podcast, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Africa. My name is Savannah Olo, and I'll be your host for today's episode, as well as all the others that you've been listening to. Welcome back for those of you who've been tuning in with us throughout. And welcome for those of us who are new to this podcast. Today we're going to be talking about leveraging African perspectives to create African solutions. And our guest today has nothing short of experience. Having graduated from Harvard University with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering 2014, Spencer briefly worked as a business analyst with McKinsey in South Africa. In 2017, he started working on Cloudline, which brings sustainable logistics access to sustainable communities. Cloudline leverages lighter-than-air technology and the latest developments in unmanned aerial vehicles to deliver essential goods and services to the 1 billion people without direct access to roads and runways. Cloudline won top honors at inaugural Fast Company SA Most Innovative Companies Awards, held in Cape Town in 2020. So I just want to take this time to welcome Spencer Horne. You could find him on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Spencer-Horne. I believe it will be in the link or in the description of this episode. And as well as Cloudline, you can find them at flycloudline.com, but we'll get into that shortly. So welcome so much to our guest. Welcome, Spencer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Savannah. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me on the podcast.
Great. So before joining Harvard University to pursue a Bachelor in Science in Mechanical Engineering, you had been admitted and graduated from the African Leadership Academy. If you can recall, how's your experience like in this sister organization of ALU?
Oh, ALA was an extraordinary experience, very different to any of my previous schooling. So certainly the standout part of that experience was the incredible peer group. And I think another really cool and important part was the way in which real-world experiences were integrated into our education.
Right.
Probably the most relevant part for me was the student-run businesses that we had on campus. And I was involved in 3 of those businesses over 2 years in some way, shape, or form. And that's been really formative for me as well. And the one last thing that comes to mind is that, I'd gone in having done relatively well at school, or really well at school academically, and suddenly found myself in a, group of peers who were incredibly strong and had to make that adjustment. I think sometimes that we only encounter at college or university, where we have to reinvent ourselves.
Right.
And I think it was really good to have that early on at ALA already.
All right, great. So shortly after that, you briefly worked with McKinsey as a business analyst and then decided to take the entrepreneurship route, founding Cloudline. What sparked that transition? And tell us a bit more about Cloudline as well.
Sure, absolutely. So I'd for a very long time known that I was going to start my own business someday. And as it turns out, I really enjoyed the nature of my work in consulting. And so I was actually a little bit afraid that I might not have another chance to take the leap and to try the entrepreneurial route if I stayed and got hooked in. So after completing my time as an analyst, when most people would take a bit of a break and either go to business school or spend some time in a different kind of job, I thought that was the right time to give it a try.
Right.
The inspiration for Cloudline actually came from some time I'd spent in consulting, working out in East Africa and doing actually a fair amount of rural travel as part of some market visits, and just being reminded of the state of logistics in some countries, far-flung parts of Kenya, for example, that I traveled to, and Uganda, and really seeing the economic impact that had on those remote communities. And that was one of the catalysts for my taking the leap and founding the organization.
All right, great. So with every entrepreneurial journey, right, there are always the naysayers or people who usually doubt your vision. So were there any of those in your circles or during your entrepreneurial journey that convinced you otherwise to continue with your career at McKinsey? If so, how did you convince them that Cloudline was worth the risk?
I didn't really have any pressure from anywhere to stay. In fact, if I remember correctly, from within the organization, generally incredibly supportive. My mentors within McKinsey were incredibly supportive
Right.
of the move, especially those who were close to me. I think had a very good understanding of why I was making the choices that I did in terms of career.
Yeah.
I think for me there was a lot of internal doubt because I had at that point. One could describe it as having been in a particular kind of trajectory, right? And
Yeah.
this was a big risk, stepping away from that and potentially slowing down that career trajectory. But I think I benefited a lot from an incredibly supportive community in that regard.
Okay, so with that said, maybe you can tell us um, what what the five major realizations were when starting Cloudline. Like, what do you wish you knew then that you know now?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. Well, I guess several things. The first would really have to be, or the overall messaging, I think, for me going in would be there is no real playbook.
Right,
This looks different to each entrepreneur in their particular journey.
right,
And so when I approach what is sometimes sort of the standard or canonical advice within the entrepreneurial world, and you know, these days we find that in all kinds of places. I follow a number of entrepreneurs on Twitter and have a number of mentors. And so one gets a real variety of advice, but I think that the key thing for me there is that looks different for everybody, and the context is different for everybody, and it's different for our own businesses.
yeah,
And so if I summed it up into five things, I guess the first would be is, you know, when seeking out advice and mentorship, I like to nowadays, now that I have a better understanding of this,
right.
like to fill in the gaps in my knowledge,
Definitely, yeah.
but never outsource the decision. You've got to own that decision internally, because we're playing in a kind of a you're playing in an environment of probabilistic outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And I think that sort of bleeds into the second key lesson for me there, is that there are these outcomes that are sometimes out of our control.
Yeah.
And the situation right now with the COVID-19 outbreak, I think, is a great reminder of that. Is that there have been many entrepreneurs who have had a very specific plan for their businesses, and that's completely been disrupted by the outbreak over the past couple of months.
Yeah.
We're a little bit more fortunate in that Cloudline, in some senses, is building a business that is for disaster preparedness, that's for getting out into communities with poor logistics access. And we've targeted healthcare from the start as one of the sectors that we want to enable getting into those rural areas. And so for us, the adjustment to the current environment is not as drastic as what many businesses are facing. But that's an important. I'm thinking of the five lessons you asked me for.
Right.
If I gave a third, I guess it would be that entrepreneurs should, I think, acknowledge that they are human, and you know, we cannot always see everything coming, and we can't always control all of those types of factors. So it's okay, and I think it's quite important not to be too hard on ourselves, not to
Right.
be too judgmental of
Yeah.
ourselves. It's always by far the easiest thing to do, especially when things are not going exactly as planned.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I think the follow-on thought to that would be is I've learned never to act out of fear of failure. I think there are many reasons to take decisions and to take certain actions. But one of the guiding principles for me is to make sure that I'm not being reactionary and not being averse to the risk of failing. I think that's really important. As people are deciding on taking an entrepreneurial path or not, and as they are making very key decisions within that entrepreneurial path.
Right.
So yeah, that's. I think I only hit 4 points there, but since I'm not at McKinsey any longer,
There were
that's
some
okay.
juicy points, I can't lie there. Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
So congratulations are in order.
Thank you.
Cloudline recently won the inaugural Fast Company Most Innovative Company Award in SA. So how differently are your solutions addressing the usual African challenges? Well, aside from being agile, as you mentioned earlier, being able to be prepared for dynamic changes like we're experiencing at the moment. So how different are your solutions addressing the usual African challenges?
I think to the local audience, and in South Africa, we're a very different startup or atypical to what's usually seen here for a number of reasons. I think the first is, and this is just a big, very easy distinction, is that we're working with hardware. And that's still quite rare. I think anywhere in the world, hardware is hard.
Yeah, because everybody's trying to do
you know,
something digital, software.
with good reason, right?
Yeah,
There's some
definitely, yeah.
very good unit economics and exponential scaling that happens in software. That's it's magical, and there's a good reason that folks pursue those businesses.
Yeah.
But there is a need for hardware businesses and disruption in that space, but it is, I think, because of a variety of reasons within our context here, including the risk appetite to get funded in hardware. I think it's not as common to find hardware startups that are based on the continent. On top of that, we are then dealing with what could be called pretty non-mainstream technology. This is not, we're working with airships, modernizing a relatively old form of aerial tech.
Yeah.
But it certainly isn't playing within where the standard space within which drone tech is currently converging. And so that in and of itself is a risky proposition, but it's something that we believe has huge merit and advantage in the problem that we're solving, in the particular markets that we're looking at. And I think the last thing in that sort of recognition of what we're doing differently is we really are going for one of those really big billion people problems here.
Okay.
More than 1 billion people are affected by the lack of access to roads around the world. So it's one of those really pressing challenges. And I think one of the things that really makes me passionate about working on this is that we have not seen progress in this arena for decades.
Right.
It's one of those things that's really struggled despite many countries having gained independence
Yeah.
over the past half century or so. We haven't seen that necessary progress. And it's one of those areas that, because it's relatively different to the problems that we're typically facing in our settings in cities or in the rest of the developed world, it doesn't always get as much attention. So I think those are all things that we think about differently within Cloudline.
All right. Well, following up on the kind of problems that you're addressing and like your unique value proposition there, the unmanned automated vehicles industry has faced multiple regulatory challenges on the continent, like getting licensed to use a country's airspace. So, how did you mitigate these roadblocks? Then, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, that's a great question because regulation remains one of the key risks for the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And there have been a number of very strong reactions and frustration expressed at the regulation that's out there. But I think the key thing for us is that regulators are showing an immense openness to granting permissions for flight
Okay.
where safety can be demonstrated robustly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing is this is an area with very good reason where it's safety first. It's a little more difficult, especially from a startup perspective. It's not really the place that you move fast and break things. It's we try to go by the mantra, move as fast as we can without breaking things,
Right.
as we have to operate overhead and over communities and non-users. Those are all very key things. And the way that we internally deal with this is, on the one hand, the proposition that we are putting forth to those regulators and that we're demonstrating is inherently a safer aircraft. If you look at the airships that we deal with, if there is some kind of outlier event and anything goes wrong with the equipment on board, be it the propulsion, the communication, whatever else kind of technical issue may arise, the first thing that happens is we float. We don't fall out of the sky, and so that's the first important thing. As a result of that, we get the luxury of time to resolve whatever issue has just happened.
Yeah.
And so that ability to have a much longer reaction time and to deal with any situation versus the usual seconds that you have in the aviation space before a situation has devolved out of control, that makes a huge difference as well. And so altogether, that's a kind of a built-in fail-soft is the term that we've adopted for that. The other way that we're approaching regulation is because there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg aspect
Right.
to show us or demonstrate safe operation, right? On the one hand, it's like, yes, you can fly beyond visual line of sight flights if you've safely proven you can fly visual line of sight flights. And of course, so, which comes first? You sort of need permission somewhere in order to do that level of testing and to build up those flight hours.
Yeah, definitely.
And what's been really helpful there is we have been engaged by the UNICEF Innovation Office in a paid pilot that is also coming with access to some of the drone corridors that they've set up on the continent. So they have corridors in Malawi and in Sierra Leone. And so that's our path to working along that regulatory approval path and demonstrating that safe operation is that we can go and fly in these corridors and not get stuck in the in the chicken and egg problem there.
Right. There must be a lot of politics around that, no?
I would say yes and no. So for the moment, there is a fair bit of fragmentation in terms of policies from country to country. And the way we think about that is quite simply, we'll go to the countries that are ready for us now, and we can expand into others in the future. But on the reason I say in some senses it's a little more apolitical is that one of the older and probably one of the most impactful and effective organizations within the whole UN ecosystem is a body called ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization.
Yeah.
And it's probably the UN body that has the largest membership of any UN body. I say that under potential correction, but pretty much every country in the world is a member of ICAO, and it has a level of harmonization of policy and rules that and a level of cooperation that's downright miraculous and enables everything we see in commercial aviation today. And in some senses, that's almost above the daily fray and the sort of the political and geopolitical tensions and disagreements that we see around the world.
Right.
Is that incredible cooperation that's allowed us to keep our skies safe no matter where we are in the world. And the really exciting thing is that ICAO is moving forward quickly on harmonizing these regulations for drones across the world. And as we see that happening, it's going to be a huge enabler for the impact that drones can have. So we're quite excited about that.
So I'm hearing a lot of accessibility when you speak of what Cloudline does. And so with that said, figuring out a business model for startups is challenging, let alone while dealing with remote communities in Africa. These much-needed innovative solutions, need to be affordable and yet ensure sustainability of the business. So maybe you can tell us how you were able to strike this balance.
Yeah, I think for any startup out there, the business model that you go for is it's one of the biggest learnings. It's one of the things you plan for, and that has to be really flexible and has to evolve as you evolve and learn from your clients and your customer base. For us, I think there have been a couple of really clear cues from the market and from predecessors on what works in terms of bringing hardware like this to the market. And we've settled on a hardware as a service business model, or a drones as a service business model, which has been very, very effective by some of the pioneers out there. I think speaking to how we make that work for people who are our direct and paying customers, as well as the ultimate users and beneficiaries of those services. If we think about, for example, targeting the humanitarian aid sector and developmental aid sector, what we're dealing with there is really a set of large institutional enterprise-like customers, or even governments, and so that's sort of a very clear customer base for us. But we're traveling into rural communities and coming back, and there is an opportunity here not just to take in the goods that we need to deliver for these large institutional players, but actually to find a way to bring back local products from those outlying areas. And that's something that we're still actively exploring at the moment, but it excites us a lot because it's something that could potentially be done on a model of cross-subsidization, and in a way that can support those local economies to grow and to participate in the global economy by bringing their products back to a regional market. This will be very, very context specific. If you think about cash crops potentially that one could bring back to local and regional markets, or artisanal products that could be produced in those areas, these are the types of things that we would potentially be able to open up markets for, and to do quite cheaply. And the way that we eventually get to that affordability is going to be through economies of scale. So on the one hand, we've got those large institutional players who can be a beachhead market for us, but then also to ultimately, as we grow the network, we can serve that many more users.
Hearing you talk about this, it truly embodies the topic of this specific episode. And we can definitely feel the enthusiasm and passion towards what you're doing and the impact that it has. And, where do you see Cloudline in the next 3 to 5 years? Like, do we see the same enthusiasm?
Absolutely. So I think, you've touched on the fact that because we are so driven by our mission here, I think the team really draws its energy and excitement from that. So within the next 3 to 5 years, where are we? Well, my hope and plan is that we're making a real difference on the continent. So by then we will have been, have many hundreds and thousands of flying hours under our belt, and operational centers in different parts of the continent to deliver these services to remote and rural communities. That's certainly my hope. But yeah, we are very excited about where this goes.
So unfortunate that we're running out of time, but we do hope to have you on here again sooner or later. Maybe you can finish off by telling us what key tips helped you reach this far.
I think this harkens back a little bit to some of those points I mentioned earlier. I think, but instead of reiterating those, I think the things that I would acknowledge as having been absolutely crucial to our progress thus far are, on the one hand, an incredible network of support. And here I've got to acknowledge the early supporters of Cloudline who have said, we believe in this. We believe in the team, and that we're able to deliver this solution. And we've had incredible support from early proponents that have brought us here. So I think that's been absolutely crucial to where we are today. And I want to acknowledge all of the people who have played a role in helping us come this far. I think all entrepreneurs should really think about how they can not just necessarily tap into their networks and support system, but what they can bring to others. My sense of the way that networking in general has worked out is that there are folks with whom, once you've really sort of been in the trenches with them and spent actual time working with them, that over time these are the people who come through, and I think there's an opportunity there really that is one where you can give, and there's a real sense of almost gaining from what you put in to that kind of network and community. So I would encourage anyone who is keen, any would-be entrepreneurs out there, to think about the way in which they cultivate those relationships, and what they put in, how they assist others. Very, very small inputs and gestures today can often come back and be incredibly important down the line. So, yeah. But as I said earlier, do not act out of fear of failure. So, yes, it comes with its ups and downs, but it's incredibly exciting.
Thank you so much, Spencer. It's been great having you with us to tell us more about Cloudline, particularly highlighting how you were able to leverage African perspectives to create African solutions. Finally, maybe you can, tell the audience where they can find more information about Cloudline and maybe more information about you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you, Savannah. Thank you for having me on once again. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege. Listeners can certainly find out more about Cloudline on our website and follow along there. We've been heads down on tech, but we'll get better about sharing what we're working on and posting up some videos of our flights and progress. So I'd be quite keen to have our followers there. We've also got a Twitter channel where we post some of our progress and some photos, which is at Fly Cloudline. The website is www.flycloudline.com. So I look forward to having folks visiting us there.
Well, guys, you heard it here first. Flycloudline.com. Thanks.